There are many different kinds of libraries. Of course, we all know the school library. You have your college library, so that's an academic librarian. You have museum librarians. Then you have company libraries. For example, Walt Disney, they have a library. Yeah, so I work at a national lab. So we work for the Department of Energy and we work as a contractor for the government. I forgot to mention as well law firms, and they require people that have a JD. Oh, medical libraries too.
The JobGuppy podcast is on a mission to help career explorers and job seekers find out from real people what a specific career or job is really like on a day-to-day basis. Join me, your host, Chris Hodges, as we dive in and explore jobs with each guest. You'll hear from experienced working professionals with transparent, realistic, and job-specific insight about their daily roles and their career journey. We go on to explore other topics like job search recommendations and income and salaries. You'll hear answers to questions like, do I need to go to college for this job? How much college? What is your work-life balance like? What do you like or dislike, or what would you do different? And if you don't like what you hear about one job role, we discuss alternative job titles to explore related to the same industry. And my favorite part is the end, where the guest shares their inspirational insight and recommendations for the next person wanting to get started on their career journey. I hope you listen to this episode all the way through, because you will find that Karen takes us on an adventure that I'm pretty sure nobody would expect when they hear she is a library director. Unless, of course, you are already a librarian. If you know, then you know. Karen's career journey was not straightforward by any means, in neither job roles nor geographical work locations. She has worked all over the world and found the silver lining in most scenarios. Having the ability to find the silver lining, take away positives from negatives, and then apply them to your current life today can be a very powerful skill set on its own. I enjoyed hearing Karen describe what her career as a library director is like today. And it's not like I didn't already respect librarians. I visit our local community library on a monthly basis just to enjoy the ambiance, as weird as that may sound. But that was the only library I've ever thought about. So I was amazed to hear how many career fields a librarian can participate in. And I have a whole new level of respect for all librarians now.
Hi, everyone. As Chris said, I'm Karen Holt. I'm currently a library director, and I have been working in various roles as a librarian since 2008. However, I've had many different careers that have led me on this path to becoming a librarian. So before I became a librarian, I was an English teacher abroad. I worked for an artist and managed his drawing collection. I also worked at a textile company. I have pretty broad experience in a lot of different industries.
So right now, you're a library director?
I'm a library director. So I manage a library. We have about 80,000 books. So we have archives, and then I manage a team of 11.
Let's just go ahead and do what we do, jump right into a library director. So you talked about managing books, 80,000 books. You talked about managing people as a library director. But when you say like manage books, what would that be like? What did you do Monday? What did you do Tuesday? What did you do last week, this week? What's on your plans for next week? And as you kind of just start thinking back through those, that'll help paint a picture.
Yeah, sure. So in my role, a lot of my role is really management. So I have meetings. For example, today I met with one of my team to discuss some issues that have come up in the library. We're currently going through a move. So I'm having to plan what to do with our space. I'm working with designers and selecting furniture, fabrics. I just deaccessioned, and that's kind of library terms, right? Deaccessioned a map collection, but we had thousands of maps that no one looks at. So we made a decision that we were going to let those go. So we're currently going through them to see which ones have lasting value. So which ones people at my company will use, but which ones we could also essentially recycle. It's kind of a less known thing. Libraries have all kinds of different collections. So with mine, I have material dating back to the 1940s. So we look at that and we have researchers who request that. So one of the things that I've done over the last month is develop a process for those requests to make it a little bit faster. So I'm always looking at ways to improve our process, to make sure that our customers are really happy and they can find the material that they want. If we don't have it, then I organize or buying it or getting it from other libraries. Because I work in a company library, I work with people in many, many different areas on different initiatives. So yesterday, for example, I had a meeting with our knowledge management team, and I'm advising them on how they can use the library for their resources to capture knowledge and retain it. So that when people are coming into a new job, they'll be able to access a set of resources to get them off the ground quickly, or when they're leaving, to have a system in place for capturing that knowledge. So, one of the things, for example, my company and many companies struggle with is that we have people that have been in the company for 30 years. And when they leave, how do you capture that and transfer it to someone? So, my library anyway, has an important part in that. Next week, I'm going to be looking at research data. So, how do you organize that? How do you store it? How do you make it accessible? So, if you do an experiment, you want to make sure that you can have that data accessible for years and that you can share it with your colleagues. So, that's many different facets of what I do just beyond working with books.
That's very interesting. If I was trying to guess at things you were working on, like I'd have a lot of questions, but I wouldn't have thought of stuff like that. It sounds very specific. Like, this is a question later, but I'll go ahead and ask it now since the way you're describing things. You're a library director and you're at a company, and I wouldn't have associated, I guess, a library director at a company versus like just your normal downtown public library. So what you're saying is there's roles within companies for library positions, management as a career field where it's not just the name of your town and public library when you look stuff up.
Right, exactly. So actually, that's a great question, Chris, because there are many different kinds of libraries. Of course, we all know the school library, right? So when you're going to school, hopefully you had a school library. You have your college library, so that's an academic librarian. I've also worked in that field. You have museum librarians. So at your Museum of Art, they probably have a library with librarians, which I've also worked in museum libraries. Then you have company libraries. So, for example, Walt Disney, they have a library, librarians, and archives.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I work at a national lab. So we work for the Department of Energy and you work as a contractor for the government.
So, and that's what I like to hear out of these is the things that somebody may not have thought about. I would have just thought like school librarians and public
Yeah.
librarians. So that's pretty neat that this is exposing, at least to me, this is
Yeah, yeah.
exposing
No, no,
a
not
couple
many
of
people
genres
know.
and fields.
I forgot to mention as well law firms, and they require people that have a JD.
And what's a JD?
That's a legal degree. So people who study law, after you go to law school, you graduate with a JD. So most law librarians also have law degrees. Oh, medical libraries too.
You kind of talked about it a little bit, but what I like to do is kind of do like a time breakdown. So, how much time are you in the office? Are you out of the office? You're traveling versus how often your time is in meetings as a library director? Specifically, what's that like talking to others versus working on your own? How much time are you planning versus how much time are you actually doing?
Most library directors are pretty much based in the office since you have to be there managing an operation. So for me, it's not possible for me, well, I know this wasn't what you're getting at, but it's not possible for me to really work from home more than a day a week because I have to be on site. But I also have been doing a lot of traveling. So typically, librarians go to a lot of conferences. So we have a main conference called the American Library Association, which happens once a year. Typically, librarians will travel for that. So I travel to that conference. But with my current job, I actually do a lot of traveling because I was in a special management program. I've been able to travel to several different national labs around the country. So there are about 17 of them. So for example, I've been to Tennessee, I've been to Nevada, I've been to California. I'm going to Santa Fe next week. Then I'll be in Nebraska in March. So with my job, I'm very lucky in that maybe for me, lucky, I love to travel. Maybe other people would find that a little stressful.
And that's okay, because what I want this to be transparent, not that you're trying to sell the job to people. It's more
Yeah.
about just sharing the nature of your job and letting people decide if they do like to travel, they're like, ooh, I'm checking that box off, or if they're like, I
Yeah.
don't like to travel, maybe I'm going to put an X in that. So it's not so much that I want you to sell it as much as I just want to talk about what it's like.
So I should tell you that I'm a little different from most librarians.
I was going to follow up with that question of, is that typical or not of library directors?
I would say no. Generally speaking, most librarians tend to be introverts and tend to be planners. But I am more of a visionary leader and I'm an extrovert. So I'm a little bit different. And one of the reasons why I actually got into this field is because I wanted the freedom to be able to live anywhere. And that's something that you can do as a librarian.
As far as meeting, talking to others versus being on your own, do you spend more time talking to others than you're on your own?
Well, I think my role requires a lot of meetings generally. Because if you're looking at a library director at a college or at a school library or a medical library or where I am, you're typically part of an organization. I mean, also within the city, you're working with the city government. So you're kind of managing these people above you. So you have a lot of administrative meetings, figuring out the mission of your organization, how you can meet it, learning about, let's say, new initiatives happening at your company or within the city. And I typically think about how can I tie into that so that I can convince them of the value of the library. Because, of course, one thing we always struggle with is funding. So it's always important to me, anyway, to be out marketing, talking about our successes, talking about what we're doing, and then listening as well to hear what people need, what's going right, what's going wrong, and figuring out opportunities to connect that. I also have a lot of meetings with my team. I meet with them each on a monthly basis. And then I have meetings with my boss, those kinds of meetings that you're going to have in any job, right? Like with my boss. And then I work very hard to meet with our patrons, so people coming into the library. Because I'm at a company, it's a little bit different. So, in the sense of their colleagues.
And I would guess what you're describing is, to me, it sounds pretty typical of what most library directors would be doing, regardless of where they were. And it's something I wouldn't have thought about. Maybe if somebody's already studying it for the field of it, but if somebody hasn't reached that level yet, I wouldn't have thought about some of the things you mentioned. You're having to work with patrons. You're having to talk to somebody what their goals are, their visions. How do you align with that? How do you keep yourself relevant with the big picture of whoever is providing the funding? I don't think of a librarian like that at all. I will go ahead and jump into the next segue. How did you know this is what you wanted to do early on? And then what was your career path to get to where you are now?
Yeah, a great question. I'm probably different from many people, or maybe not. I don't know. But I did not know what I wanted to do.
Okay, you're not that different based on the people I've interviewed so far. More than half were just doing stuff and fell into what they ended up
Yeah,
doing.
that's pretty much it. I was so jealous of people in high school that were like, I want to be a doctor and I'm going to be a lawyer and I'm going to go in government. And I was like, I have no idea.
I will say, Karen, right there, even the folks who ended up doing that by the time they graduated, a lot of them spent the first 2 years of school not in what they ended up doing. They started off in something else, and then a couple years into it, they did some kind of like internship, co-op, or did something in that field that they were going to school for, found out they didn't like it that much, and they actually switched gears kind of in the middle of school to what they now do. That's part of what's getting this out there, is trying to help people navigate some of that or see how do they fit in with how everybody else did it, because there are some assumptions about that. I actually was somebody who wanted to be an engineer.
I know it's my interview, but did you know in high school you wanted to be an engineer?
Yeah, got introduced to a computer early on and some programming, and I did some of that in eighth, ninth grade. We were writing little programs in BASIC, and Louisiana school. I was doing Fortran and Pascal, and so it just carried into college. And I didn't know exactly what kind of engineer I wanted to be, but something like with computer programming, electrical engineering. And funny enough, that's kind of what spawned or generated this podcast. I was interviewing college students who were either looking for internships or looking for their first job out of college, entry level engineers. And they knew they were graduating as an engineer, but they didn't know there's like 100 different disciplines you can do as an engineer. And so they were interviewing for a job with my group. I was like the interviewing manager. Even when I wasn't the interviewing manager, I would just help participate in interviews. My question would be, do you know what we do? And they would say, no, I don't know what a validation engineer is. Hearing that enough times, there's a need to get this kind of information out there. Like, how could I do that? And so I'm trying to break it down to that level. I know what I went through. I know what other people went through. My own kids, what they went through.
I know that's so interesting once you realize all the things out there. I mean, honestly, I had no idea that there are so many different types of libraries. Also, one thing I find a lot of people in my field have is this thought that they can't move from library to library. So, for example, if you want to be a school librarian, that you can't move into a public library, or you can't move into a college library, or you can't move into a company library.
I want to circle back to that, but let's go ahead and talk about that. How did you know this is what you wanted to do?
So I went to LSU for my undergrad. So while I was there, I just fell in with a group of friends who were librarians or friends of librarians. And so they were all trying to convince me to go to library school, which is a graduate program after you do your bachelor's, a 2-year program. And I was like, no, no. I mean, I'm like, that's not me. I'm much cooler than that. I'm going to do my art thing. So I did go on to do my master's in art history, and I completely struggled to find work. So I finished with my master's. I went to school in the UK at the University of Essex because I got a Rotary scholarship, which paid for my tuition. And then I had volunteered and I had done lots of things, but in art museums. But then after graduating, I applied for something like 100 jobs and I didn't get anything. Yeah, working in a coffee shop and a jewelry store on the weekends. So, and it was so bad that I started like highlighting the typos in my rejection letters. And it was not a
You
good
weren't
time.
you weren't bitter, were you?
I was not bitter at all. I mean, I did a little exhibition around my living room of all the rejection letters at one point with the typos.
That's okay. That's part of sharing this. Like people need to know that's part of life. It doesn't stay that way. There is hope. That's great to hear how you handled it because that's part of the whole process, the rejection. But there's ways to cope with it. It's not the end of the world. Keep trying, keep going.
No, 100%. What I did, I started reading every book I could read on how to write a resume, how to write a cover letter, and I really just educated myself on how to do that. I did searches online for like great cover letters or great resumes, and then I just kind of started experimenting with it. And then eventually I found a job. And to be honest, I'm really grateful for that time where I was struggling so much because I meet people who haven't quite been through that. And I feel like I had a lot of resilience. But it was kind of cool that I also had a part time job in a coffee shop. So I met a lot of people and made a lot of connections, and I had free time to read, and I got free coffee when I wasn't working. So there were some perks, and I really love working in a coffee shop. And actually, it developed a lot of skills that I use today. I mean, the ability to talk to anybody, the ability to deal with demanding people, to be of service, to create a great atmosphere for people. So, really, I feel very strongly that every experience is something you build on and you grow throughout your career. So, you might not think this is where I want to be right now, but I guarantee that you'll learn something from that you can take further.
That's great because I talked to one guy who actually used experiences like that. It doesn't have to be work experience to build your experiences. He was like, travel. I don't know if he said go sit in a coffee shop, but he was like, every little thing that happens is an experience and it's helping you.
No, exactly. And I feel like, I was such an overachiever. So, of course, it was like very deflating for me to like not be able to find a job and not, to work in a coffee shop and all these things. But in retrospect, I mean, I think, I developed a lot of drive and resilience and just the ability to work with anybody.
So it wasn't that you started off wanting to be a librarian. You were actually aiming for the art field, kind of art
Yes.
historian, right?
Yeah. Art historian, curator.
And then you read the books on writing resumes, you made the connections in the coffee shop, you built your resiliency up. Where did that start moving into where you are today?
Yeah, well, I have not had a linear life, so I just want to tell everybody like it's okay. One thing leads to another, and I still sometimes don't know what I'm doing. I finally got a job. I worked for the glass artist Dale Chihuly in Seattle. I actually ended up managing his drawing collection. So there were a few thousand drawings that he and his team had done. And so I was responsible for the logistics of shipping them and archiving them and cataloging them. So basically describing them, author, title, subject in a database and how to find them, which actually is kind of exactly what I do. So what I discovered is that even though I had dreams of being a curator or a historian, I'm actually really good at managing items and I love systems, which I did not know before I had that job. So I did that and I actually hated working for an artist.
I was waiting for this buildup of you loved it, and I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah. Yeah. I was like, I'm 24 and I'm miserable. It was just chaotic. And then I decided I wanted to teach English as a foreign language. So I moved to Europe and did that. And I taught English in Germany. I worked at companies, so at Mercedes Benz, and I taught everybody from the heads of the factory to people on the line to secretaries English. And then I also did it in Italy. And that was great because, again, I love working with people. I got a lot of experience teaching and learning how, again, to navigate different kinds of people and different cultures. Next, after I taught English, I was like, well, maybe I should get my life together. I need to contribute to my retirement and kind of get things on track. So then I came back to the US and I worked as an art consultant in Houston, where I bought artwork for companies and very wealthy people. And I did that for a couple of years. Again, I found that I was gravitating towards like shipping the artwork and the systems and managing the collections for people. And really, I still wasn't happy though. I was still like, I don't know that this is really me. I don't know that I really fit in. I come from a working class background, so being in that kind of art world environment is just not a really world that I felt that I fit into. It was very interesting. It's a kind of education that I can take anywhere and really talk to anyone about. However, I really felt like I just wanted to be of service and help people. And so that's kind of what led me into librarianship at that point. I also looked at my friends and I felt like, okay, they had really stable jobs. They had good benefits, they had good salaries. A downside to working in the art world is that it's really horribly paid. And so then I thought, well, it kind of meshes with a lot of things that I like to do. I like to talk to people. I love to read. And so I applied for library school and I went to UT Austin for that. And what I found was all these experiences have really just come into play and I use them every day. When I started as a librarian, I really wanted to be an academic librarian and work in a college. And I did that in the beginning of my career. But what was great is I was a reference librarian. So much like when I was an art consultant, I was always doing research based on people's questions, trying to locate information, try to find things, get books for people. But I also did a lot of teaching. So having taught English as a foreign language, it was right there. I had all the teacher training. I can walk into a classroom and deliver a lesson. So part of that role of the librarian is to train students how to use resources and how to find information. So really everything that I did before becoming a librarian is something that comes into play throughout my career. And I feel like for most people, everything sort of comes full circle if you're open to seeing it that way.
Is that the career journey? You have more there?
Well, I was just going to say my career journey, of course, becoming a librarian, I have worked in the US, but I've worked abroad as well.
And what were some of the international roles that you filled?
I worked in the Middle East, actually, in Doha, in Qatar. What a lot of people may not know is that there are actually American universities in the Middle East. So, for example, Texas A&M has a university in Doha, Cornell, Northwestern, and Carnegie Mellon all have branches there.
Interesting. Never would have thought of that if I had to list 10 things a librarian could do.
Well, I was going to say also you have different colleges too in China and Singapore. So that's all to say that there are librarian jobs there too.
What was next?
After I did that, I came back and that's when I first got into management. So I managed a reference department, so reference and instruction librarians. So those people that you see working the desk when you walk into a library, that's your reference librarian. And then after that, I decided I was going to take a year off and try to go work at a startup in Germany. I moved to Germany, which you can move to Germany and look for a job for 6 months. And then I found a job working at a startup that makes an ad blocker. The company I worked for was AdBlock Plus, and it's an extension you can download and it blocks all the ads on your website. So you can have a completely different experience of the internet.
Would you consider that an orthogonal step at that point from kind of how you had been navigating?
I have a very entrepreneurial mindset. I felt at the time that I just wanted to go work in a startup so I could be in a place where I felt like things were really happening, just kind of be a part of that energy. And one thing that people don't realize about libraries is that we are truly on the cutting edge of new technologies. In addition to, being able to, well, there are different skill sets within the library, but all of us have to keep up with new technology because we're always implementing new things. So, for example, I have a very strong interest in AI. So I'm looking at how we can integrate that into some of the things we do in the library so that we can stay relevant. So one of the things I'm working on in my current job is a workshop that I'll use to help train people in how to work with large language models and the kinds of language that you want to use to input your prompts into a model. So I think libraries are people don't really realize like how flexible you have to be and how adaptable that you have to be. So that's kind of why I was interested in working at a startup because I really wanted to be where we're creating technology. Well, I should say I wasn't a librarian there, actually. I was a community manager, and I did all the social media, which is another role that you can have in libraries too. And I managed beta testing community. And then after that, I got a job to be the head of the library and to be the head of divisional information management at NATO headquarters in Brussels.
All over the world. It's pretty amazing.
I mean, I really always wanted to live abroad, and I always loved languages, and I always loved traveling. So I have done my best to put that together with my career.
That's an interesting way to ponder a career of putting those together.
Well, I firmly believe if you can dream it, you can do it. If there's something you want to do, if I just take one step and try to make something happen, that the universe is going to come and help me get there.
I'm a big believer in just do something. You mentioned for you, it was take one step. For me, it's like do something. You just keep doing something and something's going to happen. Sooner or later, you take that step and put things in motion.
Yeah, exactly. I really believe that. And it might not be what you think you wanted to do or, your dream, but just never know what's going to happen. So I was at NATO for almost 2 years, which was really interesting because I worked with people at that time from 29 countries. And there were only 40 Americans there. So it's very unusual. And then I moved back to the US, closer to my family. So I was actually the director of a medical library after that. And we were at a small health school. And that was really great. I love working with students. So I still have students contact me asking me for help. I like to tell them I'm your librarian for life. Then I went on vacation to New Mexico and I fell in love. And again, being a librarian, there's jobs everywhere. So I looked for jobs in New Mexico for a year and then I found my current one.
And that's where you got to where you are today.
Yes, and that's where I am today.
All right, so let's talk about it. I'm already surprised a lot, but if there's anything you feel like you want to add, the next topic is there anything about your job you think would surprise people to know?
Well, I'm sure this whole interview is probably a little surprising because you kind of think of your school librarian who's very quiet. And there are a lot of librarians like that. I think one thing that people don't realize is that there are so many different roles in the library. So me as an extrovert, I naturally gravitate towards the reference role where I'm answering questions or teaching. I mean, I could talk to people all day and I could be like at that desk and I love like getting questions I don't know. Like, I don't know what's coming. I mean, it could be where's the bathroom? It could be I have to develop a communications plan for the country of Libya. I mean, that was my favorite question because I met with the woman who was in charge of communications and setting up basically a communications department for the country. So I got to help with that. So it's like you just never, I just love that. I love that I never know. But then you have people who do acquisitions. So what they do all day is they buy books, they talk to vendors, they could negotiate contracts. So, for example, right now I manage a $5.5 million budget. That's a pretty substantial budget. Being able to negotiate contracts is a really good thing because we have vendors that like to charge a lot. So being able to say, no, we're not going to pay that. That's an important skill. We also have a lot of troubleshooting. So if you are looking at, let's say, books online and the site goes down, then you have to be able to talk to the vendor and have that kind of work too. And then I have people who manage interlibrary loan requests. So if we don't have a book, we can get it from another library. So that's a full-time job for some people. And then you have people that catalog. And so what they do is they spend the whole day like looking at a book, putting the title information, the author information, the subjects into the catalog so other people can find that. And so these are all different personality types. And so I really feel like there are just so many different things you can do in the library with different skill sets, like managing facilities, for example, HR. We kind of think of one kind of person, but there are really many different roles.
That's what I'm getting out of this. I've heard a lot about what you like about your job. Is there anything you like the most, but also what do you dislike?
Well, I love working with people. I mean, that probably came through already, but that's my favorite thing. I find people so interesting, and I'm also incredibly service oriented. So I really like trying to figure out what they need and how to make that happen and thinking of the next big thing. So making a connection so that we can build out a service that might not exist at the moment. For example, years ago, I did a whole thing with QR codes in the library to connect people from a book title to scan the QR code and get to a book. And people kind of made fun of me, like, is that going to take off? And then COVID came and, turned out it did. So I like doing that kind of stuff, kind of experimenting with some new technologies and new ways of connecting people with information. I hate routine. Like, I hate cataloging and details. So I am not good at that. I'm not good at something that requires a lot of, let me sit down and work on something very specific all day long with no interactions.
That's good to know. But you do have to do that stuff sometimes, or are you able to avoid it?
I do. Yeah, I have to do that sometimes. But I try to limit that. I mean,
Okay.
because I'm a boss, so I can delegate.
And on the topic of work-life balance, and this isn't so much a do you like your work-life balance, it's more about what is your work-life balance like?
Being a librarian, you have awesome work-life balance. I mean, I work overtime just because of my role, because I like to get things done. As a director, it's a little bit different, but as a librarian, it was very rare if I ever had to work any overtime. It may be that you have to work evenings and you have to work weekends sometimes. That's a possibility.
But it's not the norm, would you say?
It depends on the library.
So that's something somebody should check when they're interviewing. They should be asking. They shouldn't just assume it's not going to happen. That's something, a conversation they need to have going into an interview is what is the hours? What's the norm?
Yeah, I would say absolutely. You have some work environments where everybody has to be there at a certain time. You have other libraries where it's like, I don't care when you come in. And I've worked in both, but that's definitely a good question to ask. And you'll have some jobs that are just weekend librarians.
Is there anything unique or something that sets you apart in your role compared to the norm? Sounds like your whole career journey is unique, but I don't know. Maybe this is a norm. Maybe all the librarians you met have similar stories. I don't know.
You know, librarians are very interesting. Like, people have really interesting hobbies, and people are very, I don't know, intellectual and just esoteric. It's a really interesting field. There are so many smart people, but different people. So that's what I like. But for me, I'm really, I mean, I think I'm pretty different because I'm an extrovert and I'm very big picture. So I'll just give you an example. I love personality quizzes. I hope some of these listeners that are coming out of high school would take like a Myers-Briggs test online because it's really interesting. And my personality type is the exact opposite of the main personality type for librarians.
So it is something unique to you.
Yeah, so that's very unique to me. And I think that my approach, because I'm very driven by relationships, as you will probably understand when you listen to this, is that I'm all about creating connections. So rather than focusing on details and making sure everything is 100% correct and being conscientious in a way, I'm much more focused on building relationships and influence.
You talked about some of the different kind of librarians, and is there anything you'd like to add there about the different roles in your field than what you said already?
Well, I mean, I just want to add to when you hear these things, you might think like, oh, if I work in a medical library, I have to have some kind of science background. And that is absolutely not true. For example, well, looking at that, I don't have a degree in science, but I was the director of a medical library because it's really much more about the skills. And you can always learn the subject area. And I'm the head of an engineering library. And I can tell you there are times when I look at the title of a book and I have no idea what any word in it means.
And that's interesting because there's been a few roles that I've talked to people, and based on the title, you would think they need an engineering background or a medical background, and they don't. Like that's their degree was in communication, or they had a business degree and they had nothing to do with engineering. It's kind of misleading the job title with what people put onto it of what they think they need, and they just dismiss it altogether without actually kind of giving it a little bit of brain space and saying, let me just talk to somebody about it.
One thing I've learned is not to put limits on myself.
My saying there, don't tell yourself no. Let the other person tell you no. Okay, education. I'll say it sounds obvious, but you can correct me if I'm wrong, that these roles you talked about, library field, do require formal education. And I'll go so far as to say it sounds like college education. And we can talk about how many levels of college, bachelor's, master's, like if there's kind of delineations there. Is a college degree required for this, or is it possible to do it without?
Yes and no. So to be a librarian, it absolutely requires a college degree and a master's. But that said, if someone's interested in just checking out, like, hey, what's it like to work in a library? You don't have to have a degree because there are roles called library assistant or circulation assistant, where you could have a high school degree or just a bachelor's.
Is it a specific degree that you would look for?
There's a couple different names for it. So I have a master's in information studies, and that's kind of the new, well, it's not new anymore, I guess, because my degree was in 2008, but it's really where the field has been going for a long time is just the study of information rather than the focus on libraries. But you can also get a master's of library science, and I have MSIS, so Master's of Science in Information Studies. But basically along those lines, and there are many programs in the U.S.
On the programs, I call them golden tickets. Are there any schools or programs that are just like profoundly known in the community that the top 3 schools in the US, if you go here, you could get a job anywhere?
That's a really good question. I don't know that it works, like say an Ivy League works in my field. However, I went to UT Austin, which I'm like promoting here with my little School of Information mug. And they are one of the top programs in the US. And it's always been, I think, in my favor that I went to school there because it's a recognized leader in the field. Syracuse is another great school, University of North Carolina, and then University of Washington. Oh, and University of Illinois. So those would be the top 5. And I think it's great because they're really all state schools. While it would be out of state tuition, but if it's in your state, like I was living in Texas and went to UT and I got a scholarship through library school and I got a grant because I was a Texas resident. And so it really worked out for me financially to do that.
Before we move away from education, do you have any ongoing certifications that you just have to continually every year keep up with?
No.
If there's anything you want to add as far as websites, forums that are known in your community that people commonly go look at?
Yeah, well, I love the American Library Association. So that's the big professional organization for librarians. And it's ala.org. And they have job listings, they have detailed descriptions of positions, they can tell you which library schools or these master's programs are accredited. They also have scholarships too. So if you're interested in going to library school, they have Spectrum scholarships and they have a program called Emerging Leaders, which I did. So there's all kinds of things that they offer and have information about.
So now we'll move into the job search part of it. And this is kind of where we can circle back to some of those roles you mentioned. I don't know if those were the specific names to look for, but if somebody was searching for a job, what would be your role? Sounds like library director. I don't know if it's always mentioned that way. And I'll have example job searches. Well, I'll actually go put links to some searches for different roles just to give people an idea of what that might look like for somebody who's never even done a job search or something. Are there some role, like specific titles you think would be on job postings?
Well, certainly, I mean, librarian, that's going to cover a lot. But what I actually do sometimes is I just look for library because if the posting is from a library or there's a job in the library, it's going to say that word in the job ad. And so for my role, like you were saying, library director, well, it's also called library manager or supervisory librarian. Those are probably the 3 most popular titles.
Can you think of any names of companies right now that you mentioned a few that you might have already worked for?
That's a good question because sometimes it's hard to find. I mean, there aren't a lot of openings. Actually, I have a good example. So for me, I'm hoping maybe one day, I mean, I love my job and I love my company, but I've always wanted to work for the UN and they have librarians. There's a great website, unjobs.org, and I go look for librarian jobs there. But you can also set alerts. So for various organizations, like say the World Health Organization, which also has librarians. So I have an alert set for this job through the WHO.
And so the thing there is if somebody puts in library, maybe they don't get the companies or the categories of companies. That might be a better way of saying it. It's not like a company name. It's more of like a category or an industry you're interested in. But really didn't even know how to ask a question. I was trying to form it in what some company names, but I think what you're saying is outside of just putting in the word library, you also can put in organization like industries. So if somebody's interested in the oil field industry or the art field, like they can go look for companies associated with those industries and then look for librarian type jobs within the
Yes.
industry. That's another way to go job search.
And in fact, ExxonMobil has a library. In addition to ALA, the site I mentioned before, so Special Libraries Association, SLA, I think it's SLA, they are actually specialists, well, in special libraries. So a special library is a library in a company or a museum, not your typical library. And they have job postings as well for different companies. So say a pharmaceutical company or an oil company.
You mentioned the specific organizations, and I'll put those in the show notes. What about like LinkedIn, Indeed.com? Is that also a very common place that's used?
LinkedIn, particularly for company jobs or university jobs, and then Indeed. I mean, that's really my go-to. So I would recommend setting a search if there's a particular geographic area or particular place that you would like to work in.
This goes into it's along the job search, but from a different angle. If you're a hiring manager, what are you looking for from a candidate? Let's say somebody probably more on the news side that might be listening, to this and wondering how would they interview? What would you be looking for?
For me, I look for people who are friendly because I feel like it's so important that we really are a customer service organization. So I look for really great customer service skills. And I look for somebody who is adaptable, meaning that they can learn new technologies, that they're open to working with a bunch of different people, that they react well with change. So those are really the two main things that I look for. Because I feel like a lot of other things, like either I or someone on my team can train them to do the job, but I want them to be able to work with people well.
Now, moving on to the income, based on your knowledge and experience, anything you want to share there?
So it's very interesting with libraries because, as I mentioned before, we have different kinds. So if you think about the salary of the profession that you're supporting, that's going to align with how much you're going to make as a librarian.
Ah, I see.
Yeah. So public librarians, starting, of course. I mean, that's going to be the lowest starting salary.
Do you think of them as in like the public civil servant working with their city officials, so you can kind of look at like what the public servant in that community might be making, and that's probably where you're going to be at.
Yeah. Just as an example, I think my information might be a little bit old, but if you're working in New York, say, and you're working at the New York Public Library, which is an incredible institution, you're probably going to be making in the 40s, maybe 50s. So that's all to say, like, yeah, the public libraries tend to pay lower than any other library. That said, there can be a trade off with benefits. So let's say the next level would be academic librarian. That's probably going to start off 50, 60,000, somewhere in there. That said, interestingly enough, I've observed that community college librarians tend to make more and they get more vacation. If vacation is your thing, then I would say community college because some of them have like 4 weeks off at Christmas, spring break, only Fridays in the summer. So there are some really nice perks to being a librarian in a college. Some colleges also give you free tuition for your children.
Get into some of the libraries in the corporate world. I don't know if there's a tier to it that you were trying to work your way up to different tiers.
There can be tiers. It just depends on the organization, but a medical librarian is going to make more than an academic librarian. A pharmaceutical librarian is going to do quite well, like a legal librarian.
Is the ones who make more, would you say the work is harder or more complicated or complex?
It's probably more complex in some ways. I would imagine I haven't worked at a pharmaceutical company, but I would imagine there's this, a basic level of knowledge that you're going to need to have that you might not necessarily have in a public library.
Do you make more with the more education you have? So if you have a master's over a bachelor's, or is it benefit you to go ahead and go get your PhD? Is that a way to make more money?
That's a good question. So because really to properly be a librarian, you're going to need a master's. We're all kind of at the same starting field. The thing maybe sometimes with academic librarians is that they tend to have a second master's. So I have a master's in art history and a master's in library science.
And so in that case, if you wanted to optimize your earning potential, you should probably talk to somebody before somebody in their early stages just assumes, let me go get my PhD because that's going to give me the best optimal earning potential. It might not be that way. It might be go get 2 masters. You might be better doing that.
For academic libraries, I mean, certainly I've had colleagues that have had PhDs and maybe they started out with 1,000 or 2,000 more than me. Honestly, I don't know that 5 years of work would be worth that.
That's important. That's part of the point of the question is how to maximize your money. Why not do it in a way that optimizes all the side benefits too? Like if you're doing it because you love it, why not make the most you can while you do it?
That's true. And the PhD question is certainly an interesting one because let's say that if you wanted to go really far in your career, I mean, we're talking big bucks for the librarians, then yeah, I think a PhD would ultimately help you there. So imagine you want to be the head of the library at the University of Texas at Austin.
If you're going to get your PhD, you probably want to have a really good target of what you're doing at that point, not just doing it blindly because you think you're going to make more money if you have a PhD.
Exactly.
The maximums area, we talked about the entry level starting positions or the public positions, moving on up into the corporate. But is there any kind of like known cap? You're at the top of the field if you're making 300, or you're at the top of the field if you're making 900.
I don't really know the salaries at those levels, but I think, for example, the UT Austin example, right? Like you're the head of a library at one of the largest universities in the country, then you're probably going to be making 350. The head of like Los Angeles Public Library. Okay, I don't know their salary. We could probably look it up, but I'm guessing you're probably making $500,000. And that's really kind of reaching the top. And I think as a library director, it can start anywhere from like 70 to 150.
We're getting close to the home stretch. This is kind of where we step back a little. You've sprinkled some advice throughout this section. This will kind of be the opportunity to just speak directly to any advice you have for somebody.
I've mentioned so many things, but really not putting those limiting beliefs on yourself and taking advantage of every opportunity, and really just reaching for any experience that you can get, because it will come into play at some point. You'll either learn like you love doing something or you hate doing something. But I think every opportunity that you take and that you say yes to will help you grow. Really, I feel very strongly about like, if you can dream it, you can do it, and just go for it. I have never really done this, but I have seen people do it very successfully. And that's to like just reach out to someone whose job you think would be really cool, or reach out to somebody who's the head of something and tell them you want to work there.
Yeah, I love it. And it's very easy. Almost everybody's on LinkedIn. You can almost find anybody. So that's a good point. Normally it's like networks. You find mentorship programs, you talk to professors, but what you're saying is just go straight to the person that's at the company and try to get some interaction going.
Exactly. If you have a listener who thinks that I have an interesting career, they're more than welcome to find me on LinkedIn and contact me. I'm happy to chat. I'm always open to that.
Thanks for sharing that, offering that. That's been a pleasant surprise to me that I have had several people put that out there, that if somebody's interested and wants to get in touch and follow up with them. I had one guy to go so far as to say he actually does mock interviews with people that reach out to him on LinkedIn.
Wow.
It's kind of nice and refreshing to hear like, hey, I'm open. I'm here. Come talk to me.
I like giving back, and I feel like my career has been so varied that I'm always happy to talk to people so that they really see that there are so many opportunities out there. Thanks, Chris. This was really fun, and it was nice to talk about my career. So I appreciate having the chance to chat with you.
That's a wrap. If you like what you hear and want to take the next steps in exploring your career after listening to an episode, go to JobGuppy.com to see a summary and helpful links to things mentioned during the interview, like industry-specific forums or websites, example job searches, career ladders, and degree programs or trade school recommendations. The hope is you now have more information than you did before from the guest on the podcast to help you move forward with the next steps on your career exploration journey. Tune in each week as JobGuppy continues to explore a million jobs in the sea.